A new report is suggesting that some Canadian real estate markets lost as much as 12% in September. In 1 month, a 12% decline in 1 month. That's a record-setting decline and the 5th straight month of declines in the Canadian real estate market. But before I get into all the details and tell you which markets fared the worst, do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. And by the way, if you're new here, this channel is all about thriving financially. So if that sounds like something you're into, then you're in the right place. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's discuss what is going on in the Canadian real estate market because this report is really, really scary. The single worst month of declines on record. Now, there is something to note about on record with this particular report. I'll get to that in a minute, but let me jump you into the headlines and show you what's going on here. So this is the headline from BNN Bloomberg. This was posted at about noon Mountain Time in Alberta here. Canadian home prices post record monthly decline in September, according to the Teranet National Bank Composite House Price Index. Now, there's one thing you need to keep in mind when it comes to this index, and that is that it has only been around since 1999. So while it is the biggest declines on record, and by the way, these are substantial declines, they aren't necessarily the biggest declines on record historically within Canada because this data doesn't go back very far. Canadian real estate is known to have horrible data records. It just was really hard to get all the boards in line with respect to how to collect the data and how to all agree on what the benchmark price would be, which is why in a lot of ways, this particular benchmark and this particular index was created. So its accuracy is really, really good, but it only goes back to 1999. Now, with respect to what's happening, this is really quite scary considering the fact that even in 2008, when the financial crisis was happening in the US, we didn't see declines that were this big. But what you'll notice when we get a little bit further on here is that the declines, the biggest declines are happening in the markets that had the biggest run-ups or the most amount of craziness during the pandemic buying spree. And just so you know, the previous record for the biggest declines in Canadian real estate was actually last month in August when housing prices went down by 2% month over month. Now this month, they've gone down by 3.3% compared to August, which is a pretty big decline in a single month. But some markets, like I said, are faring better than others. And what's really important to note is that some markets are down significantly and some markets are up, believe it or not. Even though interest rates are up, even though it seems like the entire Canadian real estate market is falling down, some markets continue to be up. And by the way, if you are in the market for a home, if you're looking at buying a place in the next little while, I have a system for helping you determine which markets you should be buying in and which markets you should be avoiding. So in other words, how to assess the market that you're in to see if it makes sense to buy right now. And obviously there are certain people that have to buy regardless of what's going on in the market. Well, I guess nobody has to buy, but it still makes sense for some people to purchase. And we've put those tools and we've put that system together in our Homebuyer Masterclass, which is priced really, really low. So if you're looking at getting into the real estate market and you want to be informed and you want to make sure that you're making the right decisions, that is the single best place to go. You can go to homebuyermasterclass.ca. I opened up 10 new spots at Thanksgiving. There's 3 of those spots left. So if you want to be involved and you want to figure out how to make the right buying decisions at the right time, that is definitely the place to go. Plus, it teaches you everything you need to know about buying a home in Canada. So without further ado, let's get into some of the numbers here. I'm going to jump you in and show you the actual data. There were a bunch of markets that really stood out to me. So first and foremost, Calgary is up 1.2%. Edmonton is up 0.2%. And Halifax is up 1.1%. And then surprisingly, one Ontario city, Brantford, is up 2%. So there are markets that are still performing well, even while markets around them are struggling. And these are the markets where if you're looking at buying in the near future or buying is on your radar, it's probably a good time to be looking in those markets. Now, there are other markets that you probably don't want to be buying in right now. You don't want to be catching a falling knife. And by the way, I have another video that I did recently on why the Canadian real estate market is going to drop 50%, even though these numbers that I'm about to show you kind of indicate that they could drop by 50%. I'll link to that video at the end of this one so you can go and take a look at the rationale of why the market isn't crashing everywhere and why there are still safe places to buy in Canada. But moving into the markets that aren't performing well, this is where it gets really, really interesting. So Peterborough is down 11.8%. So this is the market I was referring to that is down almost 12%. This is absolutely crazy that they lost 12% of their values in a single month with respect to a normal benchmark property. And what a benchmark property is, that is a property that is agreed upon as being a pretty normal property in different segments of that market. So these are very standardized, and for them to lose that much value in that short of time is absolutely crazy. Now, this is where it gets more interesting. So Victoria, which was recently ranked as one of the most unaffordable markets in Canada, according to RBC last month, is down 5.9% in a single month. Windsor down 5.4%. Belleville down 5.1%. London down 5%. Do you see a theme here? These outlying areas outside of Toronto, outside of Vancouver, where people rushed to during the pandemic as they sought more freedom from basically the downtown cores. Well, these are the markets that tend to be suffering the most. And then this is where it gets interesting, because if you look at the overall market in Canada, down 3.1% when you take all the averages of the composite markets. And if you look at Vancouver and Toronto, this is what really tells the story, because these markets are down pretty similarly to what Canada is as a whole. So if you look at Canada as a whole, down 3.1% last month, Vancouver is down 3.5%, and Toronto is down 3%. So in other words, the two biggest areas with the two biggest populations are down pretty similarly to what the national average is, which means you've got a whole bunch of other cities around the country that are either bringing it up a little bit or bringing it down a little bit, but the majority of the average is in those high population areas. And Vancouver and Toronto are very much leading the numbers with respect to the Canadian national numbers. And you'll see that consistently going forward. If Toronto and Vancouver catch a cold, well, the headlines and the news will be all about how the Canadian market is down, whatever Vancouver and Toronto are down. But there are, again, going to be other markets that are going to be faring better and faring worse. So you really have to pay attention to your local market, not what is happening on the national news when it comes to making buyer decisions. And again, we talk about that quite a bit in the Homebuyer Masterclass. So here's the reality. The markets that had the most activity during the pandemic are the ones that are suffering the most. More resource-rich markets like Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, and Halifax are faring better. And again, it comes down to what's happening in your individual market, and you need to know how to assess your individual market with respect to making your buying decisions. Because again, if you're looking at that national news, you're going to see headlines like this, and it's probably going to scare you into making decisions that aren't in your best interest. So if you found this video useful, do me that favor, hit the subscribe button. Here's the link to the video on why the market isn't going to crash 50%, and we'll see you on the very next one. Cheers.